Doug Simon from Tredas is our market analyst this week. Grain futures have bounced back after market pressure drove them down early in the week. Positive corn export news was drowned in the wake of selling. Soybean exports continue to come in low, now 9% behind the rate projected. Weather concerns for the soybean crop in South America shifted from Argentina to Brazil. Domestically, rain across much of Kansas triggered a downturn in wheat as parts of the southern plains fell into an exceptional drought. Meanwhile, outside pressure continues to mount due to President Donald Trump's decision on placing tariffs on imported steel and aluminum. We talked with Doug Thursday morning and began by asking him how the tariff discussions are influencing commodity trade.
Well, on Thursday morning, Donald Trump was supposed to announce like $50 billion in tariffs and worried about intellectual property rights. And so there's a lot of talk about that, but hopefully you're hearing stuff from the Chinese premier. He's saying that he's open to more open markets and less restrictions, and so you're kind of hearing kind of the wide sidelines about what's going to happen in trade, and hopefully there are going to be more negotiations there. We're hearing that there's going to be more negotiations on the NAFTA side of it, that we've set those kind of guidelines or sidelines, so to speak, and then we're going to come back to the middle and hopefully get some things really bear down and get down to the details and actually have some improvement for the agricultural sector, hopefully on the NAFTA side of it. And eventually there's definitely a lot of concerns about the exports, say, of U.S. soybeans to China, if they would impose tariffs on us, because we export a lot of soybeans. Brazil exports a lot of soybeans to China. U.S. attaché, for example, this last week said that they expect China to import about 100 million metric tons of soybeans. USDA is saying about 97. That's a lot of soybeans, and they got to come from somewhere. So it's not like they're going to completely shut off the U.S. soybean exports. So there's still a lot of beans to be exported here to go into China.
Well, on that note, corn and soybeans both continue to lag in terms of export numbers. Talk about corn first in terms of those exports and what you see there.
Well, we had 2 years ago a drop in the safrinha crop in Brazil, and so that gave us a lot of export opportunity last year. They've had a lot more competition with us just here in the last marketing year, and so our exports are down from where they were a year ago. So we're lagging that, but we've had a little better pace because our prices were low relative to other exporters, so we've been able to gain back some market share, but we're still down from where we were last year. And the same thing with soybeans. We're about 18% off the pace of soybean exports from last year. They've improved here with the prospect of the lower Argentine crop. So we have a little bit of prospects, but overall our exports are down from where they were a year ago on both corn and beans.
How long will it take to make up those numbers?
Well, with the trade war talk going on, there's some psychological barriers there, and that has an impact. You think back at 2012 when we had $8 corn, it took us a while to gain back that export share. So unfortunately, it disrupts trade, and it gives people, hey, do I need to look for other sources of those imports? So it definitely has some impact, but if you look at going into next year with the Argentine soybean crop being lower, there's going to be better opportunities down the road for U.S. exports of soybeans. And the corn side of it, when you look at it, there's some opportunities down the road just because of the fact if you look at the world carryover on corn, that's actually one thing that's kind of exciting because it dropped from 220 million metric tons down to about 200 million metric tons. And when you look into next year, a new crop, and we'll talk about that in a minute, when you look at that balance sheet there, it's actually a little bit tighter and a little more optimistic than the soybean side. And so there might be some more opportunities on corn exports down the road.
Two big reports are due at the end of this month, at the end of March. Talk about those reports and remind us their importance.
They're really important. We're seeing record kind of stocks of March 1st on both the corn and the beans. The beans are just over 2 billion. Corn's, I think, up in that 8.8 billion bushel range. Those are record large numbers, so there's really adequate stocks. So we've had rallies here recently in the face of those big stocks, but it's definitely going to be important, going forward. I think the acre numbers that we're going to see here, those are going to have more bearing. If you look at the soybeans, we're kind of expecting maybe 90.5 million acres and 91 million acres of beans. The corn maybe in that 88 to 89. So you've seen a number where the beans are actually now higher than corn acres, which is the first time ever to see that. But going forward, that lower corn acre number and having some type of deviation in yields from trend really kind of gives you the opportunity maybe for higher prices down the road, more so than I'd say on the bean side. With those bean acres being that high, we're going to have maybe 700 bushels of beans carryover next year. That's one of the largest numbers ever, if probably a record large number in that, in terms of actual number. But we'll have to see how those numbers change through the year, based on weather and how those yields come out. So.
And speaking of weather, Doug, we continue to see weather driving the markets, especially as we move out of Argentina, as we look at those concerns and into Brazil, and then we look towards the United States weather forecast. Talk about how that's affecting.
Well, the Argentine weather story is pretty much drawn to a close. I mean, their crops are very mature now at this point. The safrinha crop in Brazil is off to a very good start, and it doesn't look like that's in any danger. They've had adequate rains there. The rainy season seems to be progressing pretty well, so they don't seem to be concerned about that. Looking at the drought monitor in the U.S., you can see that there's a very dry area in southwest Kansas. They got some rain in central Kansas. A little bit of the Panhandle, Oklahoma this last week will help the wheat a little bit, but it's still in very poor conditions down there. But the big question is you've got kind of a wetter eastern Corn Belt area with more rains kind of slated for there later this week. The big picture is that we're kind of in that not El Nino, we're not La Nina, we're kind of in between, which probably gives us a little more weather volatility going forward.
You always like to ask the question, what are we going to do about it when it comes to these markets? So what are you recommending to people as we move into April in terms of their marketing?
We like to look at pre-harvest marketing where we sell ahead of time. You want to be selling increments over time, and usually your prices in the springtime are higher than they are in the fall, so we want to take advantage of that. And so we've been selling new crop corn, new crop beans. When you look at the break-evens, we've been above that here recently, so we definitely want to take advantage of that. Option volatility is low right now relative to historical averages, so if you're worried about prices going up later, there's some cheap option strategies that you can put into place to kind of help you with that, kind of give you the encouragement to sell. But given the fact that crop insurance season just ended, if you bought revenue protection insurance, you definitely want to be looking at those forward sales and doing that in conjunction. So we also look at old crop corn. We've had very good prices here lately. The basis levels, surprisingly, have held in here well, considering the rallies that we've had. Basis on beans is probably about 20 cents wider, but we've had a very big rally there, so it makes sense to be still moving old crop corn, old crop beans on the recent rallies that we've had because they've been very favorable for us.